Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. So we're now on episode 2. Amazing. We've improved by 100%.
Let's see if the quality has improved by 100%.
Well, I hope so. Um, for anyone listening for the first time, you're on the third Pint Theory, hosted by myself, Michael Donaldson, and
Myself, Martin Bridges.
Yes, the beer bigwig. And yeah, today, a really interesting episode. We've got an interview with, I guess he's a legend in the New Zealand brewing scene, but also we're kind of right in the thick of what you're calling awards season, Martin.
Yeah, I was thinking that, you have the Oscars and the Tonys and the Emmys and all that. They all seem to be kind of stuck together. And in the New Zealand beer scene, it feels very much the same. We recently had the Australian beer awards and a number of New Zealand breweries participate in those, and some big winners. Altitude brewing did from Queenstown did amazingly well in that.
Yeah, champion small international brewery and a trophy in, I think it was the pale ale category, international pale ale, with their Sled Dog Hazy, which is amazing for a core range beer like that, which is a big seller in their tap room, especially to win it's a huge international beer competition. So yeah, massive for Altitude.
Yeah, and that's kind of kicked things off, and we've got a bunch of kind of smaller awards things coming up. There's the Smiths New Zealand IPA Challenge down in Queenstown.
Yeah.
Towards the end of June, I think. And then in July will be the Malthouse West Coast IPA challenge, which is a kind of a fixture of the craft beer calendar. You've been judging the New Zealand the New World Awards.
Yeah. The also in June. Depending when this gets published, people, we've got the Aotearoa Stout Challenge down in Christchurch. And we've been judging the New World Beer Insider Awards, and that is due for release on the Monday after Beervana. So that's going to be right in the thick of it. And early August, we have the New Zealand Beer Awards. So yeah, it's hosted by the Brewers Guild of New Zealand. So it's like, yeah, it is a massive period where there's going to be a lot of talk about winners.
Yeah, and I think everyone will have it interesting as to what does that mean for a brewery? Some breweries take those awards ceremonies, competitions very seriously, and I know others don't. Obviously, you're closely involved in the New World Awards, Michael. What sort of impact do you think it has for some of those guys who get in the top 30 or whatever?
Oh yeah, it's top 25 this year, which is interesting.
All right,
not a bad decision. 30 was a lot to promote. A lot depends on your size. I think if you're Garage Project, Panhead, Emerson's, I'm trying to think of the bigger Parrot Dog. They have quite a big supermarket presence already, but yet I know that they love getting in there and getting that just a dedicated promotion for a month. But where it makes a huge difference is to a smaller brewery. And 3 years ago, when Lakeman won champion beer with their Primate Pilsner, I just think that sort of thing changes their world. They suddenly have a national presence, and you get a lot of people going, really? I've had that beer, it wasn't so great, but I I think it's a beautiful beer. I love it.
I agree. I agree. It's a classic of the New Zealand Pilsner.
Yeah. And they backed that up the following year with Top 30 again with the same beer. And I'm thinking, a couple of years ago, Martinborough Brewing was one that put themselves on the national stage, or Ruapehu Brewing. And what it tells me in many ways is that there is amazing beer getting brewed all over the country. And sometimes, you go on to Untapped and you see people's ratings of things, and a lot of it's just based on, I don't know what people's criteria is for what something is good, but if it's a lager or a pilsner, it just doesn't get a score. If it's a hazy double IPA, it starts at 4 and works its way up. And I think these awards are really good for reminding people that not everything starts and finishes with hazy IPAs or double IPAs or imperial stouts, they are the high-ranking beers on Untapped. And I think it makes people appreciate, or gives them an opportunity to appreciate really good quality lager, pilsner, pale ale, sours, wheat beers, all that kind of stuff. And I just love beer when it's a broad church, and we all get to try different things. So yeah,
I think I agree. I think it's always interesting to see some of the recognition that some of the less well known breweries get. That's always the thing I like most about that. I think the Brewers Guild New Zealand Beer Awards have been probably around the longest. I don't know. It seems they're kind of the Oscars. I always say, when we're talking about beer competitions and maybe New World's the Emmys. I'm not sure what my metaphor is here, but and the New World, the Brewers Guild Awards are, I think the judging's coming up in July, and that was kind of one of the reasons that we wanted to do this interview with Ralph, was that last year Three Boys won the champion brewery again.
Yes,
so second time in 3 years. I think, and to a lot of craft beer drinkers around the country, that might have come as a bit of a surprise, because I think Three Boys are not, if you're outside of Christchurch, and if you're outside, particularly if you're outside the South Island, they're not a brewery that you see their beers all that often.
I agree, and but that doesn't mean it's not great.
No.
and
so
I think
that was kind of one of the things I wanted to talk to Ralph about, and about what does winning awards mean to them, but also the hyper local approach to kind of staying focused very much on their own area, and that linked into their focus on sustainability, both economically and from an environmental perspective. So I think that it was a great interview. I really enjoyed doing it. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get down to Christchurch to sit there with Ralph. It would have been that would have been awesome. But we sat down and we chatted, and we could have chatted for hours. So
I know. I spoke to him. I spoke to him a little bit after that in relation to another story, and I said, I heard your chat with Martin went really well, and he said I could have spoken for another hour. So, but we decided to try and keep these episodes a bit shorter and sharper. So probably without further ado, we'll just go across to this interview and let Ralph speak for himself.
We'll catch you on the other side. here we go. Welcome to the third pint theory. I'm Martin Bridges, and with me tonight we have
Ralph Bungard from Three Boys Brewing.
Excellent. That's who I was expecting. So that's a bonus. Welcome, Ralph. It's been a while since we had a natter. So I think it's been quite a while, in fact. But it'll be good to catch up. So anyway, for the people listening, watching this who might not know who Three Boys are, can you give us the kind of the 2-minute intro to Three Boys Brewery?
Well, Three Boys Brewery is an Ōtautahi or Christchurch brewery. They've been around since 2004, I think, the late 2004. So this is our 21st year in the business. I know, and that makes us sort of one of the old new wave, if you put it that way, and probably one of the few remaining independent way brewers of that time. Right? So your 21 years in brewing's been a long time. We started out as you could in those days as a tiny brewery, you know, the old story of starting out in your garage, blah, blah, with everybody has that story on their websites these days. It probably was true in that time because we had the luxury of there being a tiny craft beer market in New Zealand. There was, you know, we could have counted under breweries in New Zealand at that time, probably under 20, under 30. At least, and you know, that's taking in everybody at that stage. So probably more about 20, and so we were a rarity, and we did have the luxury of that slow start to business, which was good, you know, because the market was so small, and bursting in boots and all, and producing 1 million liters of craft beer in a year would have just not happened. So it kind of fits the old narrative of you know, the garage, and then the slightly larger garage, and then the first real brewery, and then piecing together old bits of dairy plant and all of those things that we romanticize about starting breweries, I guess, and that was sort of the romantic era of doing that in a way.
Yeah, and I think it's quite different then to where it is now. And I remember I arrived in New Zealand in 2007, and at that stage, yeah, there was very little still at that point. I guess the initial growth probably in the market was pretty slow.
Yeah.
But I remember drinking Three Boys IPA in the malt house in Wellington on Courtney Place. As is a real kind of distinct early days.
Well, they serve you underage in that time, Mark.
Oh, yes, indeed. The beer keeps us looking young. I think. But one of the thing that prompted me to want to talk to you about a few things, but we're recording this in kind of late May, and I think entries have just opened for this year's Brewers Guild of New Zealand awards.
Yes,
the judging will be in a couple of months' time, and last year Three Boys took out the overall champion brewery, which was awesome, and not for the first time, I believe.
Yeah.
How was that? How awesome was that?
It was very awesome because it was our second time in 3 years, and we've come very close before, and I think part of part of us not being champion brewery, probably way back in the early days of the beer awards, prompted a lot of changes to how the awards worked. And I remember that distinctly because Three Boys had a year where we did very well. We got goals here and there, and the count back, I think it ended up going to, I remember it was DB or Lion. I think it was DB in that time. And it was like the count back, you got 4 golds, you got 3 silvers, you got so many bronzes. And then we missed out on about the 9th medal back where we got a bronze, and Lion or DB had got it with a silver. I can't remember what one it was. So there's a bit of that was a sort of watershed for the beer awards in a way, because everybody wanted someone else to win it rather than one of the big breweries.
Yep.
And it was the first year they actually announced like the runner-up, and it was simply because the Three Boys was a runner-up.
So it wasn't DB followed by Lion rather than Lion followed by DB. Every other year.
So I remember a massive cheer around that, and we're so proud of that. But it did mean that some of the over time, of course, with the Brewers Guild, then they sort of changed that champion brewery thing. So because obviously, you get massive breweries who can enter 100 beers, and smaller breweries who might enter 10 beers or 4 beers or less. And so there's the development of the algorithm sort of started for champion brewery, which for us has worked well in the last couple of years, because it's that thing of having you have to have good beers. And I often say to people at the brewery, when people start getting a little bit het up and stressed about it, I say, look, good beers can miss out on awards, and bad beers will never get awards. And that's the way you got to remember it. So sometimes you put something in and you think it's the best example of what you've made, and it pops out the other end with no awards. But if you put something in that's not right, the judges are just going to find it's not right. And so that's the nice thing about it. It filters out the shit beers really quickly. And in some ways, I think Three Boys it's been our mantra over a lot of time. It's about quality and consistency, which is the hardest thing for craft brewers. And the smaller you are, the harder it gets. And we've tried really hard at that. Now we've just got, after 21 years, we've got quite good at it. We've got good at it because we have to compete with amazing breweries in New Zealand and amazing beers, and public that are much more critical than they've ever been for craft beer. So you can't, particularly in that expensive end of the market where we sort of sit, you can't sit there with a average beer, because you just alienate your punters, and then you have to reinvent yourself again. And so you're winning last year. It always comes as, well, we've done it twice, so I can't say it always comes as a surprise. It comes as a surprise because it's you just don't know on the night. There's so many good breweries getting good awards and doing amazing things, and so it's an incredibly pleasant surprise when it happens, and you're just sort of grateful that you've selected the good beers that have gone in. And the judges are obviously the best judges I've ever had if we've won it. And
I think the key thing that you meant, that you touched on to me, that always come to me, is that those champion brewery awards are about consistency to me, because you could get lucky and enter like 3 beers that all are awesome, but if you've to win the big prizes, you need to be consistent across everything you're entering. I think, and that to me is a real testament to what you've built over 21 years at Three Boys. Is that consistent? It's like there are no weaknesses in the portfolio. To be able to win, I think is key.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And it's kind of good in a way as well, because you can that thing where you have to win across different categories is a real challenge, because you can. We can all think of examples of breweries that can do amazing things in certain categories, like, for example, the big breweries like Lion amongst lagers, for example, or or smaller breweries with barrel aged stuff, just pumping out this amazing things, but yeah, to fit across a whole lot of categories is a challenge, and it's an exciting one because it just brings a bit of vibrancy to the brewery as well. When 1 minute you're brewing it, you're trying to fit a British ale style, next minute a European lager, and then you've got something that you've got ticking along in a barrels or sours or things like that. For us, you have to have that range in portfolio, and that's sort of what's kept us interesting to the public over the years. But funny enough, superimposed on that, you need those beers that are go-to beers, and you'll know that too, Martin, when sometimes if you go into a bar, beer is the equivalent of comfort food, isn't it? You just want something that you want the familiarity, and you don't want to be frightened by it, and you want to get to the end of that pint and in some ways not even notice that you've drunk it, and that's the beauty of sometimes a really good beer, and you just think, oh bugger, I'll finish that, and I just need one more of those. And to have those beers in your portfolio is certainly key to the 21 years, not to the beer awards, but it's key to the 21 years of survival, I think.
So is kind of brewing for or entering awards, is that kind of a driver for you? Is it something that you focus on, or is it's like, oh, the awards are coming round, we'd better make, what have we got? Is it a conscious?
It's a bit of both. We think about it because about this time of year we think, shit, what have we got? Anything that's we can enter in the awards? And your beers, you're always really critical of your beers. So whenever something comes through, because we're small, you've still got those. They're not random acts of chance, but the things that you just don't have control of in a small brewery that you might have if you had better equipment. And if we could count viable yeast cells regularly and bang them into a beer, and if all of those things, then we would have consistently better beer. But there are parts of being in a microbrewery that are still weak for us like that. We have great stuff like the Ometer is probably the best investment we've had in the last decade, and changes in techniques and changes in equipment and changes in our additives to our adjuncts to the beer and the quality of everything, they're all really important. So they're always improving, but you've always got that random little thing of chance, and so you will get a beer that you just think, this is exactly what we aim for, this is exact perfection, and you sort of hope that coincides with when the beer awards come up, and sometimes they don't, and we think, shit, we don't really need to brew another APA, but that last one's not the best, and so we'll brew another one deliberately and say, right, let's just see if we can pop that one. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. So we do put a bit of thought into it, but it's not the be all and end all. There's only a few beers we get to choose what one goes, and that tends to be ones that we brew quite regularly. And hang around and work well with age. And oyster stout's a good example of that, where we're brewing it all the time this time of year, so it's kind of good. And some beers like that one, it gets 4 months old, and unlike many beers, it's better beer when it's 4 months old than it is when it first comes out of the fermenter. So we're always
beer in a bit, because certainly that's something I want to talk about. But what's so you winning the awards is also, has it had any impact on the brewery, and does it help with sales? Does it get interest?
Not really. It's a great, not for us, I should say. It's a great thing for us. Having said that, it is a really good thing for us because it is it's really important to our industry, and recognition within our industry is really important. If people know that you've done a good job and are happy for you, that's really good. In terms of sales, we have some funny things happen, which we sometimes talk about at the brewery. We do get a little blip in a little peak in sales if we do well on the awards, for example, but they're generally very fleeting, and they're just people that like to, I don't know what it is, what's the right word without upsetting people. A good example might be for our front of house, We have quite we're in Woolston, so it's a relatively, rougher part of Christchurch in a way, up and coming part of Christchurch, but it's kind of funky and groovy and diverse, more diverse than other parts of the other suburbs, richer suburbs. And when we won last year, sorry, we had a little influx of unfamiliar faces coming into our front of house and on a Friday night and sitting down for a beer. And it was just like, these people are not going to come back next week.
Those read it in the newspaper or
down
the road.
Yeah, and they were sort of, bringing their kids in and they're asking for wines and all sorts of things. And you're going, well, we do have a wine, but it's red or white. Which one do you prefer? We are a brewery. The sort of clue is in the
large stainless steel thing.
Yeah, the clues in the name. So there's quite an interesting little peak there, but that's probably not the case for other breweries because, as you know, and you probably touch on, we've spent a lot of years focusing on that really local market, and so our local people love us, and outside of that, we struggle to get product out to places just because of the expense of it. So even if you were fleetingly interested in what happened in the beer awards, your chances of getting to taste our beer, you have to make a real effort. Yeah,
and that's I think I remember talking to people after the awards announcement last year up here in Auckland, and amongst people who'd kind of been around a while in the beer scene, everybody was super excited. Everybody's like, oh yeah, I love Three Boys. They're one of the OGs kind of thing, and everybody was really excited about it. And then you talk to kind of the younger, kind of the newer craft beer drinkers, they're like, we never see any of their beers. How did that happen? And it is that, that hyper local focus that you've had for some time. Do you want to kind of talk about that for all? Why did you decide to concentrate locally, and how do you make that work?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's not tricky. It's an interesting sort of angle because, and I think it happens in all business, but particularly in brewing, where there's a lot of pressure from lots of people saying, you've got to get bigger. Oh, when are you expanding? When are you going to do this? Why can't I get your beer in Auckland? Are you going to export to Australia? Are you going to blah, blah, blah? And we sort of touched on that, in our early days. We tried to do some of that stuff, but I think if you are being genuinely looking at how a small family-owned brewery can operate, it just doesn't work for us. You can't get the margins. When you're talking about sending a keg of beer to Auckland, you're talking about, I don't know, at the cheapest rate, $30 or $40 to get it there, and another $20 to get your keg back, or rent a keg, whatever option you're going. So you're looking at $50 or $70 difference in price for a keg of beer in Auckland of Three Boys compared with Christchurch. And the nice thing about breweries is they are incredibly parochial, so you go to Auckland and people, regardless of whether they've known Three Boys for a long time, a lot of people are still really parochial about their beer, so they'll pick a local brewery because of the profile. Likewise, if you go to Dunedin, that's been a parochial brewery town for years. And Christchurch, in a way, we are the same. Wellington is another good example of the parochialism. And so you've got two things going on. You've got this really expensive product because you had to bang $70 on a keg. And then you've got people saying, well, that's a bit expensive, isn't it? And it's not local, so it's kind of like, it's really hard. So if you cut your price and just be a standard beer so the bars want to buy you, then basically for us, we would be losing money. And some breweries will do that, but I think you've got another overlying thing with breweries. And again, without without trying to upset people, is you have to bust through that ego thing, because there's nothing better for your ego as a business owner than seeing your beer being sold or drunk somewhere. But you've got to put that aside and think whether someone drinking that beer in Auckland, for example, is actually costing you money, and is that worth it for your massaged ego? And sometimes it's not, you got to think, no, it's not. So despite that, and overcoming that pressure of people saying, why aren't you in Auckland? Why can't you supply this? Why can't you do that? You simply tell them the reason. You say it's too expensive, and you won't buy it when it's there because it will be too expensive. And we're not willing to discount, because if we do, we won't be around in 20 years' time. We'll be.
That sustainability thing, I think, is key. And it's a lot of, and I think with the thing you said at the start as well, that this growth at all costs is a mantra that's kind of pushed into people. And I think that kind of knowing how big you want to be and making that work. And if you can sell everything that you produce in the local area, then why wouldn't you? It's
pushing for that small margin is hard. And I think for us too, thinking about it in the sense of New Zealand is an incredibly small market. We've got we've got 5 million people, and how many of them are over the age of 18? I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm making up a number, but let's say 3 million. And then how many of those are beer drinkers? And let's half that. So you're down to 1.5 million people. And then how many of those are craft beer drinkers? And you go, well, let's quarter that. Well, you're down to hundreds of thousands, a small hundreds of thousands of customers in New Zealand, not millions. When you've got 200 breweries fighting over 200,000 customers, it's 1,000 customers each. And so getting through that model where you say, well, we've produced 1,000 litres of beer, we've made this much money, therefore, if we produce 2,000 litres of beer, we'll make twice as much money. Because of that restriction of the market size, that blows apart. And so people forget that too as well, I think. So that expansion model looks great on paper when you take it to the bank or take it to your shareholders or take it to the crowdfunders. But it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because there's nowhere to sell it. And so you end up with breweries thinking, well, let's look at Australia then, or let's look at exporting to China, or let's export whatever. And that's that brings in another part of our reasoning for staying local is just environmentally, that's just bullshit, and even us sending beer to Auckland is bullshit, pretty much, because we're shipping 95% water to a place that has good breweries. Even with a strong brand, so you're turning from a brewery into a branding company, which most breweries largely are. But that's part of our conscious decision to stay local is for environmental reasons as well. It's unsustainable to package product, send it to somewhere who already has that product, and it's
especially since kind of the long distance freight in this country is kind of primarily either air or road, neither of which are particularly environmentally sustainable. The outlet is totally understandable. It always makes me sad because I love your beers and I wish I got to drink them more often. But and I know that I can go to for me here in Auckland, I can go to Lickle and Forest Hill. Shout out to Susie at Forest Hill, that she will always have a selection in there. Or I do what I occasionally do is get a mixed case shipped up and spend a couple of happy weeks working my way through whatever excitement has been coming out of the brewery. But
and I think that's fine. That kind of scale is fine, but to try and supply on a supermarket scale over that distance, kegs taps into a bar on that scale all the time, you can't sustain it, because people will not pay for something that's always in their face and always there. They won't pay that premium for it.
No, and I think in general, the industry is struggling with costs.
Definitely.
Anyway, I think I walked into a bar in Auckland the other week and ordered a beer. I won't say where the bar was, because that'll get me in trouble. But I will say what the beer was, because it was a Liberty Knife Party, which is an old favourite, excellent West Coast IPA, and they handed me my 400ml pint and said it'd be $17, and I very nearly keeled over backwards at that point. But that's becoming not unusual, and it's hard. And people haven't got. I don't have the money to go out and buy $5 or $6, $17 pints, and more than kind of once a month.
Well, so, and that's and that is, that is true, and it's driven by tax, and I don't want to be the one banging on about excise tax, but you're talking $1. If you're talking, we talk stubbies, one standard drink size drink. You're talking for us for a 5% beer, 98 cents of that 330ml serving is tax. It's excise tax or GST. If it was $2, it's excise tax and GST. And I think that's something that is one of my big bugbears, is that we have. I don't mind excise tax. I think it's fine, but the issue with it is it's this massive stupid hammer that hammers down on our industry, and it has zero impact on the people it should be having an impact on, and that is largely the multinational supermarkets. It's not the multinational brewers combined. If I can go into Pack and Save or New World or Down or whatever it is and buy 12 bottles of stubbies for $24 at $2 a unit at 4.5% alcohol, and you're talking 80 cents on each of those units is just tax. It's bullshit, the fact that excise tax is having any effect on that pricing, and those multinationals are basically using it as a giveaway lollipop for anybody who comes into their business and buys something. If it was tobacco, for example, and you come in and said, we're discounting cigarettes to $2 a packet today at Pack and Save, there would be an absolute uproar. And if we had a craft tobacco industry, which some countries do have, believe it or not, it would destroy them, and yet it wouldn't impact on those supermarkets, because that's their free lollipop when you come in the door. And so the government and us as people, we need to do something about that. We need to recognise that our alcohol problem, if we have one in New Zealand, is driven by those supermarkets who are dumbing down the industry and killing the product for people who really enjoy it. So when you go for a beer mart in Auckland and you think, I want a knife party pint, and it ends up to be 400ml of beer, it costs you $17. You're just getting slammed by the fact that these places are just have that taxes had no impact on them. So the government keeps ramping it up. Social pressure keeps ramping up that tax, and the only people it's killing is the people who really like a good pint of beer and put ingredients, pay their staff, pay the real value of a bottle, pay the real value of transport, get it sold at a real value to give them a return. And that when all those things disappear with those multinationals, we need to do something about that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we could probably spend all night talking about kind of the structural taxation issues around the industry. And I I know that in the recent Australian election, it was an election issue. You know, they were talking about that. So, but maybe that there's a whole other episode to get into the tech stuff. But it kind of is a bit of a segue into like the industries, the craft brewing industry in New Zealand, and hospitality around it. They're struggling at the minute. You know, like I don't think you could talk to any brewer, bar owner, whatever, and say, "Are you having a good time? Are you enjoying?" It's like I think you would really struggle to find anybody who was doing great. There are some that are doing okay. There are some that are kind of hanging on by the fingernails, and but that's it. And you recently, I know, we're caught up in some of that with your with the hop and vine distributor going under. What for a start? How did you survive that? Because I know that was a big part of the industry.
It's a big, and it's not our first rodeo, as they say. We've had them. You know, we had BRNZ do the same thing, go tits up and leave us with a hole. These people go tits up and leave us with a hole, and it's really, really hard. And if we weren't vigilant, we certainly weren't vigilant about keeping them under wraps. You know, we lost serious money with both of those events, but we were probably vigilant about realizing we had to self-insure to make sure that if it did happen, it wouldn't send us tits up. But we're lucky enough, because we've been around for 21 years, that we have a buffer, you know, and we are sort of self-insured in some respects, because we're not got the bank banging on our door saying, well, that's all very well for you, but you owe us this month. So without that kind of pressure, you can survive those things. You just have to tighten your buckle and not fuel the helicopter so often and all of those things. but seriously though, it's a real hit, and I really feel for those who get caught up in that and don't have the buffer or the self-insurance that we do. It still really stings. And what gets me about it though, what probably gets me the most, is probably in both of those situations, the people involved in those distribution companies were sort of thinking they were doing the right thing, you know, sort of trying hard, but just going backwards and not thinking about the consequences when they finally couldn't go backwards anymore and they would fold, and the people they were going to leave in the lurch. And that hurts for a start. But also what hurts mostly, because we're in the beer industry, is we sold the beer to them. They sold the beer to a bar. The bar have an ethos machine, and when they pour that pint, the money goes into their bank. So that money from our beer is in the system. It's gone into the system, and it just hasn't got to us, you know. So somebody's got it, whether it be the bar who hasn't paid their bill, or whether it be the distributor, or whether it be whoever it is on the way has got our money. And we're being at the end of it, us being the producer, haven't got it. And, you know, and the other sad thing about making beer in an industry is we paid for some of those ingredients potentially 6 months ago. You know, we pay for 6 months ago. We pay for malt months ago to get that beer through the system. We pay labor daily and all of those things. We can't do what they do and say, oh no, we're not going to pay the malt bill this month, or we're not going to pay the hops, or we're not going to pay the staff. We've done all our due diligence and all our duty, I should say, at our end, and we're shafted by people who haven't done that duty. And in New Zealand, there's not enough recourse for that. You know, there's nothing that we can do about it. Nobody goes for escape for that. We know people will be sitting with our money from the beer that they put the posh machine over the bar and got their money straight away into the bank. We'll be sitting with our money somewhere.
I remember can't remember which brewer it was I was talking to once around a time that somebody had gone under, and they said that the money goes out in a wave and comes back in a trickle. It's like you spend a lot, you pay the malt bill, you kind of do all the expensive stuff, and then the beer goes out, and then slowly over the next kind of 3 months or wherever, that batch, the money for that comes trickling back in, and it's hard, especially and I think I remember at the time that Deep Creek Brewing went under last year, the year before, that they've been running on a knife edge for a while, I think, but were okay, and then like one event happened and there was no recovering from it. So and that, I think, I worry in situations like the Hop and Vine thing and Beer NZ before, is that if that is the event that can take some of those breweries that are running on the edge,
it'll take them down for sure. I just think on that, Martin, I think about where that money is. The crazy thing about it, when we just touched on tax, is a large component of what we lost and we lose in those events is tax. So even the government's getting each year from us that we're not getting anything. So it's going, fucking hell, at least give us that bit back, because we never got that money. We never got that excise tax back through where it was supposed to come. So somebody's now walking around, well, in this case, the government, with our money also putting that pressure on small businesses. So that just makes zero sense at all. If we went to them and say, at least give us that component of it back, and they go, I'm sorry about that, we're the tax department.
Yeah, they're always at the top of the list. Hey, when anybody gets when anybody's going to get paid, then the tax man is to get there first. So and look, it's the way of the world. So I think that the key thing I would say from this is support your local breweries. Buy from your local brewery.
I think so. I was just thinking about one thing before, because I know it's stretching on in time, but I was thinking about part of being true to your roots, I guess, as a brewery is important, and for longevity, true to who you are and what you mean, and sticking with what you've got. And we're thinking about things like our brand, for example, making sure that you push through that barrier of your brand being, new and then not new and then cool with age again, so you've got there's lots of things you have to fight on that journey through time. And even this come up today, I was thinking about environmental things in the brewery, and sort of we do a whole lot of stuff in our brewery environmentally to make it environmentally right. One of them is keeping our distribution local, of course. Yep. And probably over the time from when we started brewing beer, we would have been, in our first years of brewing, we would have been 95% packaged product. Right. And a couple of taps, because it was hard to get craft beer taps into anywhere, but we could squeeze into restaurants. Now we're probably 90 to 95% draft keg product.
Wow.
And that's amazing. It's a remarkable change around and where our beer is drunk, but also it's a remarkable environmental story for us, because we had a keg come through the brewery today, and we number all our kegs to keep track of them, and it was number one. And number one of, oh God, we've got a fleet of literally 1,000 plus kegs, but there's only ever 5 in the brewery at any one time. No, they do go missing. But we have this large fleet of kegs, and this number one turned up the other day, and it was a keg that in the early days I bought off Lion Breweries. Right. And the old plastic top ones, remember? Yeah. The plastic top and bottom. And the reason why they were selling them, I was actually working at the university at the time, the reason why they were selling them is or they weren't selling them. The reason why I got them is I phoned them up and said, "You got any kegs you could sell me?" And they said, "Yeah, you've got a whole lot that won't go through the automatic keg filler because the tops of them have got a bit bent or something. But you can't, if we sell them to you, you've got to guarantee they won't get back into the system." And I thought, well, that's a tricky question. They shouldn't get back into your system. And so I bought them off them for like, they were $20 each or something, our first 100 kegs. And when I bought them off them, they were old shitty kegs then as well. And so they were probably 30 years old. And now they're 20 years old again. So we've got this sustainable packaged product that has gone out for 50 years. It has served the beer industry. It's been filled, taken out, emptied, brought back, cleaned, filled, taken out, emptied. And you're just going, that's environmental perfection, isn't it?
Yeah,
And that's something I think that's always underrated about drinking draft beer and beer in general as an industry. It's innately environmentally good.
Yeah. I think I'd never really thought about it that way, but yeah, in terms of people have, there's certainly been the shift over the last few years to cans, and one of the things that people have said is that our cans are more recyclable than glass. I couldn't say for certain, but certainly draft beer.
Yeah,
You've got that same kegs done 50 years.
it's remarkable.
Up to retirement is that.
I did think I should drag it out and put it in my office and just talk to it nicely for the rest of its time, because it's done its time.
It's certainly it's paid its dues.
I'd need to think how many times it had been filled and emptied over that time.
That'd be an awesome story. Well, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap up, and it kind of links a bit back round to a couple of those other things. And when I do not have a Three Boys beer in my glass, unfortunately, because, as I say, it's pretty hard to find up here. But if I did have a Three Boys beer in my glass, I can tell you exactly what it would be, and it would be oyster stout.
Right.
That is absolutely, when people say to you, "What is your desert island beer?" What if you had to, if you were going to be stranded, oyster stout will be the thing for me, and that's obviously still an important beer for you guys. You want to just briefly talk about the story of oyster stout and what that means to you?
It is. It's a good story, because it wasn't in our first. I think when we first started, we were aiming for that core range of beers to cover the styles. So we had our wheat beer, for example, which is still around, which is an interesting story in itself, because I can't think of any other wheat beer that's still around in New Zealand that's been around as long as Three Boys wheat, because just the nature of wheat beers. I guess nobody drinks them in New Zealand unless it's Three Boys wheat, and then they kill us if we run out. But then we had our Pilsner, we had the IPA, we had a Porter, we had a Best Bitter, and then I think that was it. And my hand was 5, and the oyster stout came after that. And it was like a bit of an epiphany. I was lying probably about, in not quite this bed, but a similar bed all those years ago, and it was oyster season in Big Fuss down south, and I was thinking about stouts and thought, oyster stout, we should make an oyster stout. And I thought, oh my God, that's a brilliant combination, because we have this seasonal oyster carry on in New Zealand with bluff oysters, and we can make an oyster stout. And so we fired ahead and did it, and the recipe is probably one of our most consistent recipes over that time. In terms of the malts. The malts changed a little bit because of Gladfield coming along and bits and pieces in terms of where we get malt from, but it's largely just the same stout. And it's a remarkable beer because people love it, and it absolutely, when it's at its best and at its peak, it's delicious. And then when it ages, it's delicious. And when it's, it's got everything about it that you love in a beer. And of course, it's got the great romantic story, because we'll say, you don't really put oysters in it, do you? And we go, yes, we do. And we have to tell them that they go into the boil, and, they're added in. And I tell them the story. There's probably about floisters, which is when they come out on the floor and they're boiled, and we have the tradition of the first oyster brew of the season. We all have to eat one of these terribly rubbery, bitter, disgusting things off the floor. And it's just it's got a great story behind it. But interestingly, we're having a thought now, and this is the first time I've actually vocalized this probably anywhere. So you have to keep this under your hat, Martin. Don't tell anybody. Stop.
Nobody's listening to this anyway, I'm sure. But
we are in a dilemma because we're thinking we've always used bluff oysters.
Yeah.
And we're so much into our sustainability. I'm a hunting and fishing guy, so I don't mind that kind of collection of things, but we need to be really careful with those natural resources. And we're wondering if we should stop using wild harvested bluff oysters and move towards some of our farm ones over time, because I don't know if it is sustainable, and we have to work really hard if we want to keep that industries like that to keep them sustainable. And the pressure that goes on them is just too intense, the way the population of the world is. And so maybe in the next few years or next year we'll have to remove the little bluff sign oyster thing off our oyster stout. But I reckon we can make it taste just as good.
I reckon it was the reason. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about that was kind of tying back into that sustainability thing, because I knew that you use bluff oysters, and then particularly this year there has been a real focus. Certainly, I know that a bunch of restaurants in Auckland have said that they weren't stocking bluffs this year. I know Night Out and so they're not landing them, and the fishery needs some time to recover. So, so I did wonder whether that had kind of crossed your mind as to it's an awesome beer. It has an awesome story, but there are other factors to take into account on that.
Yes, and I think it has to evolve, and people will appreciate that evolution. I know some of the best restaurateurs in Christchurch, the Gatherings being one of them, are taking fish entirely off their menu, and it is important, that people understand that pressure. I know that I stopped accepting whitebait as a gift off people a few years ago for that reason. Say, look, if you've caught too much to eat, that I'm not taking it, because I'm just creating that market. It's the old ivory thing, isn't it? Just don't accept it, and the market will just decrease. And something like whitebait, for example, we missed a bit of a trick there, or the government did, about not making sure that we put some restrictions on those catches and things like that. Really, really look after those little native fish. Stop eating them.
Yeah. So look, I think I will be disappointed if oyster stout doesn't have bluff oysters in it, but I'll be even more disappointed if it doesn't exist. Then I'll be really low. It's like then you will have broken my heart.
Being sort of from a science background, I like the idea of it, because it's a nice little experiment coming where we can have an old bottle of the one with bluff oysters, and we can have Pacific oysters or farmed oysters in one of them, and I'll have to get you in for a test.
Oh, I'm up for that anytime. Absolutely. Look, I think we've rambled on for quite a while. We could probably ramble on even further, but in the interests of keeping this to a reasonable length, we'll kind of wrap it up there. Look, I really want to thank you, Ralph, for your time, and for generously sharing your thoughts and your opinions. This has been an awesome chat, and I'm sure it will make an excellent episode for people. I will cut the recording there, and then thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
How about that? I think that was such a great conversation. Ralph is an absolute legend.
He is. Yep.
And he certainly has some opinions. and he doesn't mind sharing them, which I think is awesome. I think that, you know, I'd forgotten quite how long Three Boys have been around. I really didn't. For 2004, 21 years is, and to be still going, and some of those original beers still part of the core lineup. So I think that was great.
Yeah, I think just to finish off on that note, 21 years, and in some ways, I think while they have restricted their range in terms of their geographical footprint, they have become stronger as a result of it. And I think that's really cool.
I agree. I think I'm always sad that I can't get. I don't see as many of their beers as I would like to, but I am very happy that they have taken that approach and that it works for them. That I would rather them be successful and continuing and be focused on their local area. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I also found the stuff about oyster stout really interesting, because I make no effort to conceal the fact that is one of my favorite beers of all time. And I did wonder this year when they were when there was kind of a lot of talk of restrictions on bluff oysters, that what that would do. But it's interesting to hear that, you know, they are talking about trialing farmed oysters. So I hope that Ralph does take me up on the opportunity to come down and do a side-by-side tasting on those. I will definitely travel to Christchurch for that.
I'll tell you, on the notion of oysters, crustaceans, bivalves, but anyway, the ocean-related stouts, I have in my fridge something that Richard Emerson gave me, and it's an Emerson's clam stout from, I think, 2012.
Wow.
So maybe if we can manage to find, I don't know if they make that beer anymore, but I've been wanting to open it for a very long time. So maybe we'll do that live on air, the future discussion of seafood infused stouts, perhaps. Anyway, fantastic episode. Great job, Martin. Yeah, so good to hear Ralph talking about what an amazing Christchurch institution that Three Boys is, and they really are part of the fabric of that city. So excellent. That's us for another week.
Yeah, like, subscribe, send us send us your feedback. We'd be really keen to know what sort of thing do you want to hear from us? Do you want more of the kind of the Michael and Martin banter, or do you want to just us to shut up and let the brewers talk?
Who doesn't want more of us? Come on.
No, surely,
but do let us know.
Turn off as soon as the interview started. So.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, that's us for another week.